This essay is called Bring-Your-Machete-to-Work Day. In 1990, after our Apple IIe quit, our family purchased a Macintosh Classic. This was a good thing, because the IIe was a constant source of confusion for me. For one thing, it took large flexible disks that were not even, despite all tactile evidence to the contrary, marked as floppy disks. The more current model, disks half their size and so hard you could eat off them, held the public title of floppy. Also, neither of these options were, in fact, disk-shaped. For another, the monitor would freeze or blink incessantly at you without telling you what was wrong, like a pet or a baby. I tried to fix it myself once, and the brightness knob shot out and hit me in the eye. And as if these crimes weren't enough to make us love the Macintosh Classic by comparison, our new computer came with 3 free games. One of them was Oregon Trail. I have no idea what the other 2 were. A game of moderately tough choices and rawhide, Oregon Trail wound its way subtly through the late 1980s in a very un-80s-like fashion. Unlike Burger Time or Tetris, high-speed programs structured around multiple levels, Oregon Trail slowly moved towards a singular goal. It also had a distinct masturbatory quality to it. Here was something that millions of preteens did, only you wouldn't find out until much later in life. Something one could do over and over again with no diminishment of rewards. Apparently, many children learned how to play it at school, which strikes me as just plain illegal. For me, Oregon Trail was actually a private affair as well, something I engaged in after dinner when I was supposed to be doing homework. At the time, I was going through a somewhat awkward phase, both the somewhat and awkward being total understatements. I had a chin that would jut out when I smiled as if it were trying to escape from my face. And who could blame it? My eyes were too big for my head, my hair too big for my whole body, and my whole body too flat to be noticed by anyone but me. Sadly, as it is for many of us, my awkward phase found me years before I qualified for a driver's license or even the alarm code to the house. Homebound and date-free, I enjoyed an early teenagehood of drawing in journals and chatting with inanimate animals, prank-calling boys, and playing Oregon Trail. Oregon Trail, which provided me with the illusion that I was actually going somewhere. Once the game began, I became completely enthralled, pausing only to listen for the pattern of stair squeaks that would indicate a parent was descending. Oregon Trail was built on a completely unmodern premise. This also distinguished it from its contemporaries. There were no robots, no time machines, no spaceman possible in a world where people ate unrefrigerated animal guts and washed their socks in a bucket. Originally designed by a couple of college students to teach kids about the odors and tribulations of pioneer life, the game starts out in 19th century Independence, Missouri, and heads towards the West Coast. The screen itself, displaying a khaki stretch of land and a mountain range in the distance, never ever alters. It moves from left to right as your tiny wagon heads west, but there are no pop-ups requiring you to select a weapon, there are no shifts in perspective, and there are no interiors. It's like watching some brilliant independent film where there are no cuts and no scene changes, only a wagon and a little thing called destiny. It's also like watching a lost ant crawl across the kitchen counter. Though you never see their faces, you can choose your persona. A banker from Boston, likely a metaphor for Reagan, a farmer from Illinois, likely a metaphor for Carter, or a carpenter from Ohio. Jesus? Each character comes complete with a skill set and a gun. Just one rifle, this was pre-Uzi. For a future vegetarian, I sure shot a lot of venison. Unlike other games of the day, which had me leaping through traffic or called me gumshoe, Oregon Trail left lots of room for creativity. It seemed ripe for the misuse. Like a precursor to The Sims, you were allowed to name your wagoneers and manipulate their destinies. It didn't take long for me to employ my powers for evil. I would load up the wagon with people I loathed, like my math teacher, and then I would intentionally lose the game, starving her or fording a river when I knew she was weak. The program would attempt an intervention, informing me that I had had enough buffalo carcass for one day. One more lifeless caribou would make the wagon too heavy, endangering the lives of those inside. Really now? How about 3 more? How about 4? Nothing could stop this huntress of the diminutive, I can't say that word, I'm sorry, plains. It was time to level the playing field between me and the woman who called my differential equations nonsensical in front of 15 other teenagers. Eventually, a message would pop up in the middle of the screen, framed in a neat box. Mrs. Ross has died of dysentery. This filled me with glee. I actually began playing the game in 1990, but it still reminds me of the 1980s. For the sake of Oregon Trail's influence, you have to ignore the date discrepancy. There's always a bit of cultural bleed between decades, and the segue from the 80s to the 90s is infamously fluid, especially if you were a child in the early 90s, and the formative pop cultural markers of your life were 4 or 5 years down the road. It's the same reason Sunday morning movies can seem unquestionably from the 80s, but upon closer examination with the digital remote, they were made in like 1992. Think of Slouch Socks, of Roxette, of Jennifer Connelly and Elizabeth Shue with full faces. You're thinking of the 90s. Much like the Macintosh Classic itself, the 90s took a while to power up. I find that anything culturally significant that happened before 93 I associate with the decade before it. In fact, Oregon Trail was only a handful of signposts that middle school existed at all. Which brings us to now. Here, in the new millennium, there are actually 5 versions of the game available, including an Amazon Trail and an Africa Trail. But none has provided as much milk to the pop culture teat as the original. Now the Wagoneers have realistic movements and facial features. Their adventures have become complicated, but at what cost? Would I be able to go on unceremonious killing sprees now as I did then? Perhaps now that you can click a button and see the inside of a wagon, pioneer children napping through a shaky afternoon, dreaming under the dangling hides of 8 rabbits and a moose. I know I will continue to wonder. I am too fond of my memories of Oregon Trail and not in the market to have them replaced. Alas, I no longer own a machine that plays video games, so my curiosity cannot be satisfied without a significant financial commitment. But apparently the game has changed for the better. It wasn't long before the original Oregon Trail was criticized for its complete lack of Native Americans, African Americans, or three-dimensional Americans of any kind. The hunting came under a certain degree of scrutiny as well, because apparently guns connote violence. Then there was the game's blatant favoring of rich white males. The banker is by far your best choice for your pixelated proxy. He's in good health, he comes with spare funds, which can be used to buy food in times of famine or the munchies. But despite this orgy of damning evidence, I still think of Oregon Trail as a great leveler. If, for example, you were a 12-year-old girl from Westchester County with frizzy hair, a bite plate, and no control over your own life, suddenly you could drown whomever you pleased. Say you have shot 4 bison, 11 rabbits, and Bambi's mom. Say your wagon weighs 9,783 pounds, and this arduous journey has been most arduous. The banker is sick, the carpenter is sick, the butcher, the baker, the algebra maker. Your fellow pioneers are hanging on by a spool of flax. Your whole life is in flux, and all you have is this moment. Are you sure you want to forge the river? Yes. Yes, you are.